Okay, you ready, Hawthorne?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. For those of you who are joining who aren't members of our organization, welcome. And I'm Steve Carroll. I'm program director for the Speed City Sisters of Crime. And it has been a delight over the last few weeks to communicate with DP Lyle, MD. He's given me permission to call him Doug. That's okay, right, Doug?
That's okay.
And Doug is a best-selling author. He's won the McCavity and Benjamin Franklin Awards. He has been nominated for 2 Edgars, and Anthony and Agatha Shamus, on and on and on. He is one of the few folks, maybe the only person since I've been a member who's been addressing this, who has written both extensively in nonfiction and in fiction. He has written 17 books by the count on his author's page. Most interestingly for me, he's written Forensic for Dummies. He wrote Forensic Science for the American Bar Association, which as a retired lawyer, I'm not commenting on whether or not Forensics for Dummies is included within that. The same thing with the Forensics and Fiction, and more Forensics and Fiction. He has written 4, if I counted right, thriller series, including the Jake Longley book that I recently read and really enjoyed, because I've spent a lot of time on the Gulf Coast of Alabama and just and Pensacola area.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed that. He has also worked with writers of popular television shows, including Law and Order, CSI Miami, Diagnosis Murder, Monk, etc., etc. In other words, he is a talented fiction and nonfiction writer. And what we're going to do today is have a sort of a Q&A, just a discussion with Doug. I have some questions I'm going to ask him to get going, but I know a lot of you folks out there may have interest in asking questions. And so any specific questions you have, put in the chat window. And our chapter president, Janet Williams, who just won a significant reporting award here in the state of Indiana last night. Janet is going to be monitoring those questions, and she will interrupt as appropriate in our discussion to ask those questions that various people in the audience have. So with that, we'll go forward. And Doug, welcome to the Speed City Sisters in Crime. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thanks for asking me. You know, I don't get asked very many places, and never more than once.
You and I have something in common. Can you give us a little bit about your background, and including your background in medicine, because that's a fascinating combination of talents you have.
Yeah, well, most of it I deny. I was never there. I knew nothing about it. Don't shoot me. Well, I was born and raised in Huntsville, Alabama, which is kind of a strange town because it's got pickup trucks and churches on every corner, but it also has a space program in the backyard. So it was kind of a very diverse and very interesting place to grow up, with a lot of highly intellectual people coming in because of the Marshall Space Flight Center there. But, you know, I went to the University of Alabama, Roll Tide, and then I went to medical school in Birmingham, an internship there. And then I headed west to Texas, and then Houston, I did my residency and my fellowship at Texas Heart. And then ended up taking I-10 till it stopped, and I was in California, and I kind of stayed there ever since. So I live down in Orange County, and I've been practicing cardiology down here for, I've been 40 years. And a long time. And so that's what I do now. And then if I'm not in the office seeing patients, I'm home writing or playing golf.
So you still practice?
Yes. Not much. I go to the office a couple of days a week. That's it.
Okay.
I'm old and cantankerous. So.
Okay. Well, just because you grew up in Huntsville, I have to ask, did you ever make your way to Big Bob Gibson's barbecue
Oh,
over
sure.
in Decatur?
Oh yeah. Decatur was our cross river rivals in all kinds of sports, football, baseball, boxing, all that stuff that I did. Yeah, we'd go to Big Bob's. It's famous. They made the Alabama white sauce. He's the guy that did it.
Yeah, I understand that. Make great barbecue, but their pies are to die for too.
Oh
So,
yeah.
uh, so when did you become first interested in writing?
Well, again, I mean, growing up in the South, if you can't tell a story, they won't feed you. So, everybody in the South can tell a story. Most of it's, couched with lies and hyperbole, but that's the way we are down there. And especially those of us of Scotch Irish background where, Scotchmen drink in the bar and tell lies. That's kind of the heritage. But, I always could tell a story, but I didn't know if I could write one. And I guess maybe 25 years ago, maybe a little bit more now, I said that, I got these stories I want to tell. And when I retire, I'll write them. But then I thought, there's no retirement on the horizon. I mean, here we are a quarter of a century later and I'm still working. And I said, if not now, when? So I took some night classes at University of California, Irvine, which is a great writing school there. And this is in their extension program. Took a couple of creative writing classes, joined a couple of writing groups and just started writing. And, the rest, as they say.
So, by the way, I love the line, you can't tell a story, they won't feed you, because I understand that.
It's true.
So which came first for you, the fiction or the nonfiction?
Well, actually the fiction, but the first published book was nonfiction. It was Murder and Mayhem, my first question and answer book. But I wrote a novel back, 20 plus years ago that absolutely was the greatest novel ever written by a human being. It was just superb. I mean, it was Nobel Prize material. It was 138,000 words of pristine prose. And of course, I sent it off to my agent and she thought otherwise. She called me a few days later and she said, quote, "There's a story in here somewhere. I just can't find it." And her name's Kimberly Cameron, and I love her to death. She's my agent, my only agent, and always is my agent. But back then we were still courting each other, as it were. And I said, "Well, thanks. That's what I needed to hear." And she said, "I hate to be so harsh." I said, "Well, Kimberly, I went to medical school. This is nothing." But then she said, "But there's a lot of good stuff here. If you rewrite it, I'll look at it again." Now you never hear that. So I did rewrite it and got it down to 120,000 words, sent it back to her. And she said, "Nope, you're not ready." I wrote a couple of other fiction books and she said, "Nope, you're not ready." And then I wrote the question and answer book and I called her and I said, "I got something you're going to want." And she said, "What is it?" I said, "I'm not going to tell you. I'm just going to send it to you." And she called me a couple of days later. She said, "This is fantastic. I'll have no trouble selling this." And she sold it to St. Martin's in 6 days. Well, back to that first novel, 10 years later, after 27 rewrites, a change of location 4 times, a change of protagonist, a change of title 4 times, it finally was down to like 86,000 words. And I called her and I said, "Do you remember that book from 10 years ago?" She said, "Oh God, yes." I said, "Well, it's ready now." And she said, "Really?" She said, "Send it." And I sent it to her. She said, "It's ready." And that became my first Dub Walker book called Stress Fracture. So, never give up on a story. I love the story. The only thing that stayed the same through all of that was the bad guy and the basic storyline. It's just, I didn't know how to write it, and it took 5 years to learn. I mean, this is not easy. It takes time.
So what were the lessons you learned between that first 138,000 word draft that you got the response, "You're not ready yet," and 80 some thousand page word draft that ended up being published?
Well, so much. I mean, it's like 180 degrees apart. I learned that less is more. I read a lot of Elmore Leonard, leave out the parts that people skip. People don't care about a whole lot of description and stuff. Get the telling details so that someone knows kind of what the place feels like. You don't have to describe every little thing. You know, some writers do that and they're very, very good at it. I'm obviously not very good at it. So, you know, keep all that stuff to a minimum and think, move forward, move forward, move forward, move forward. And and then probably not by that time, but several books later, I think the single most important thing I ever learned is to tell the damn story and get out of the way. Too many times, and back then I was too, I'd read 100 books on writing. I'd taken a bunch of classes. I'd gone to a bunch of conferences, and I thought writing had to be good writing. But writing has to be as good storytelling. And if you go back and you read all the guys on the guys and gals on the New York Times bestseller list, 75% of them aren't great writers, but they're great storytellers. And by great writers, I mean, they're not going to be literary fiction writers. And that, to me, that's great writing. You know, James Lee Burke, to me, is great writing. He's kind of a cross between literary and contemporary. But most writers are great storytellers, but you have to get out of the way and tell the story. So that was probably the greatest thing I ever learned.
Hey, Steve, I just wanted to leap in. Somebody had a really good question here. Jeannie Vincent wanted to know how you got involved with writing about forensics.
Okay, I saw that, but let's hang on to that for just a minute because we're going to get there. But I want to comment about James Lee Burke because I agree with you. I love his writing, but it's not what I can write.
No.
Have you ever met Matthew Clemens?
No, I haven't.
He writes with Max Allan Collins.
Oh,
and and Matthew speaks at a lot of conferences in Indiana and has for years. And that's one of the messages he sends is sort of yours, although you stated it really well about tell the damn story and get out of the way.
Well, it's also interesting. James Lee Burke, back many years ago, I was on the board of Mystery Writers of America. And so we were getting ready to decide who we were going to give the Edgar to. It was Edgar's 200th anniversary. So I nominated Jim. And then we also nominated Sue Grafton. So we had two that year. I mean, wow, two great people, you know. And Sue, wow, what a trip she was. Good Lord. She was crazy as hell. I loved her to death. But I met James Lee Burke. I had never met him. We were there and we had time to sit down and talk. And he said, call me Jim. So Jim, my good buddy. So Jim and I sat and talked for half an hour. And we talked about writing and life and stuff and everything. Just the two of us had a great time. And I said, you know, Jim, my buddy, I have a love-hate relationship with you. And he said, what is that? And I said, every time I read one of your stories, I fall in love with it. I fall in love with the characters. I fall in love with the tale. I especially fall in love with the writing and the descriptions and the way you do things. And I said, I just fall in love. I said, but invariably, when I finish, I get depressed. And he said, oh, and I said, because I know I will never, ever, ever be able to reach that level. And he said, oh no, you know, he was really, he's such a gentleman. He was really hurt. I said, but then again, a week later, I'll be walking down the street and I will say, yeah, but I can get closer. And I think that's a great lesson. You know, to me, James Lee Burke and Elmore Leonard, if you read those two people, you learn about everything you need to know about fiction writing. You know, one is literary and the other was lean and mean and in your face. And I think you can learn a whole lot from both of them. I know I have.
So did you ever think about just with all those rejections of the early writing, how'd you persist? What was the secret of saying, I'm success, I'm doing well at medicine, I'm, a cardiologist, I don't need this rejection stuff. I mean, how did you overcome that, dealing with the rejection that comes with it in writing?
Well, again, I mean, I was practicing medicine. It was a full-time job back then. You know, it was 80, 100-hour weeks and running around emergency rooms day and night and, in the cath lab and the ICUs and the ERs and all that stuff. And I mean, it was high intensity, high velocity. So I didn't really have time to worry about getting my feelings hurt. And it was something I wanted to do. I mean, to me, it was a hobby. I still look at it that way to a large extent, even though, don't get me wrong, I treat my writing career very professionally, but it's not something that I need. It's not something that I would die without. I enjoy it. As long as I enjoy it, I'll keep doing it. And I always said, if this isn't fun, get up and go somewhere else and do something else, because you got a job. I didn't want another job. So for me, the rejection wasn't, I didn't take it personally. You know, if you go to writers' conferences, you sit around and talk to people, everybody's been smacked in the face with a manuscript. I mean, it's just part of life. Now, I've been lucky because everything I've ever written has been published. Sooner or later, everything got published. And, but that's work, you know.
So
Wait, Steve.
back to the
Actually,
question.
wait, can we follow up on something? Somebody asked a question and really wanted to follow up on something that Doug said earlier. Can you talk more about how to get out of the way and tell the story? I think that's what a lot of us struggle.
Oh, yeah. And I think that's the greatest lesson that you can learn as a writer. I wish I had learned it 10 years earlier than I did. But I always said that creating your voice, your own voice, comes from knowledge, experience, and confidence. Knowledge means you read a lot, and you read a whole lot. If you don't read, you can't write. I'm sorry, you got to go to school. And then experience is writing. You know, as Bryce Courtney famously said, he wrote The Power of One, and he's still, I think, still the all-time leading bookseller. And Bryce is no longer with us, unfortunately, in Australia. But Bryce said the secret to writing is bum glue. Glue your bum to the chair and write. And his memorable South African Australian accent. And that's true. So you got to do it. And then the last thing is confidence. And the confidence comes from those two. But that's the one that's got to come from within by taking all these other things. And look at it this way. There are only two stories. Somebody comes, somebody leaves. That's it. There are no other stories. Somebody comes, or something, or some situation, a shark, you know, the rival gang trying to kill the Godfather. Somebody comes, you know, the droids that came into Luke Skywalker's life, you know, and led him down that thing. Somebody comes and they knock life off balance, and the story's about getting it back to square zero as best you can. Or somebody goes somewhere and gets involved in a situation that creates stress and tension, and they must resolve. Stranger in a strange land kind of thing. So if you take that premise, every story's been written. You can't come up with a story that hasn't been written. I guarantee you can't. They're so rare that you can name them. And one of them would be Jurassic Park. It was so high tech and so high concept to create dinosaurs out of sap, you know, DNA found in mosquitoes and sap. I mean, who would have thought of that? I mean, Michael Crichton did. But those stories are so rare and so far between, and you know which ones they are. They're rare. So most stories have been written, but they haven't been written by you. And once you come to that understanding, sit down and write the story. Now, get out of the way. What does that mean? Hemingway said, write drunk, edit sober. And what he meant was get that editor out of the way, you know, write like your mother's never going to read it, you know, write like nobody's ever going to read it. It's just you, and tell your story your way. Don't worry about grammar and sentence structure. And if it all makes sense to start with, just go from A to B to C to D, go to the end, straight through, write fast, then go back and fix it. Then go back and fix it. My first drafts take like 3 months, and they're usually about 65, 70,000 words. And then when I go back and do the first 2 rewrites, I go back through it again. Suddenly the parts of the story flesh out, parts of it move around. But at the end of the day, another 6 weeks, and I've got the second and third draft done. And so, and now the story has taken life. Before I was telling myself the story. So tell yourself the story, and then you can fix it and tell it to someone else. So get out of the way. Don't let that editor, don't let all the rules of writing get in the way, because guess what? There aren't any. There aren't any. There never has been. It's all a myth. Tell a story.
So, panther or planner? Somebody's going to ask that, so I might as well ask it now.
Yeah. Well, I started out, outlining everything again, because I wasn't confident enough that I could finish a book and make it make sense. And it wasn't just a hot mess. And so I was very meticulous about outlining things. But I will say this, I would get about 2/3, 3/4 of the way through the outline and I was bored with it. So I would quit doing it. And then I would go to start writing. I just start with chapter 1 and start writing. And what I found is that by the time I got, 1/3 the way in and half the way in, I had moved all the outline around anyway. I always worked to keep my outline in sync with what I was writing, but things changed. What I thought would work didn't work, and what I thought would go here doesn't go there, and who I thought would do that wouldn't do that. And it goes on and on and on because I didn't know the people. I didn't know the story yet. I didn't know enough about it. I thought I did, but I was just creating. And I found out I'd waste 2 weeks writing an outline that it's like I never followed. So with the first Jake Longley book called Deep Six, I said, I had an idea for a scene, and that's it. I vaguely knew who Jake was. I vaguely knew a little bit he was going to have a dynamic with his father and all that stuff. Okay, fine. And I had one scene in mind. And I said, well, let's outline this and see what it feels like. And I said, no, just write the scene, see what happens. It's only words, just go at it. And I finished that scene and then the next scene and then the next scene and the next scene. And the next thing you know, I'm 30, 40,000 words into it and I have an outline an inch of it. And it all started falling into place. And now I do not outline anymore. I start everything. I will have 4 or 5 or 6 scenes in mind that I know is going to happen in the story, kind of, sort of. But I basically just start at chapter 1 and start writing. Now, will I have to go back and add scenes and do this? Sure. But so what? But again, I go from beginning to end. And if I have to fix things, I fix them later. I mean, if it's something big, like I have to move a scene or I have to change something. So I do not outline anymore. I find it takes the fun out of it. I'm bored with the story by the time I outline it. I'd rather figure out what's going on as I go along.
So going back to the question we had a while ago, which is a lot of people know you through the forensics books.
Right.
How did you get into the nonfiction writing, the forensics books?
Well, it
How
started.
that come about?
Yeah, it started because, I started going to writers' conferences and stuff. And as you do when you're a writer, you go and socialize with other people who are insane also. And if you go to a cocktail party and you're a physician, they want to talk about their gallbladder and their prostate, but if you go to and it's always for my friend, it's not for me and my friend, but if you go to a writers' conference, they want to know about drugs and poisons and gunshot wounds and dead bodies and, all that stuff. And so I started and educating myself on that. So I'm reading a lot about forensic science, a lot of books on it. And then way back in the day, Jan Burke was the editor of the local MWA newsletter, our chapter out here in Southern California. And she asked me to write an article for it. They were trying to spiff it up. I said, yeah. I said, what about one on how they time death? And she said, that'd be great. So I wrote it and there was a big response. So we started a column called The Doctor Is In, and I answered questions and people would send me questions. So I started collecting those questions. So I finally decided what I need to do, because I'm looking up stuff all the time, is I need to write an essay to myself on each of these topics, DNA, gunshot wounds, blood spatter, fingerprints, so that I have all the data at my fingertips when I need to answer a question for somebody. And then I thought, well, if I want to do that, why don't I just write a book? Duh. Writers don't want to know this stuff, so why wouldn't I? Now, educating myself in the science of forensic science was actually very simple because I already knew the science. It's science. I was a chemistry major and a biology minor in college and then medical training and all that stuff. So all of it was, all the science was right. It's just looking at it differently. In forensics, you look at it through the eyes of the law rather than as a scientist or physician. So it was the same science. Toxicology and pharmacology are the same thing. Autopsies and anatomy are the same thing. Gunshot wounds and trauma are the same thing.
All
So,
I gotta say is the guy laying on the slab might differ with the idea that
well, the guy laying on the
autopsy and
slab,
anatomy are the same, but
yeah. Well, the guy laying on the slab doesn't have any say so in it, but the guy on the operating table does. But anyway, so it was that, and so one day I was out in the desert in Palm Springs to sign my first question and answer book. After I put a bunch of these questions together, and I was still working on this book called Forensics for Writers, and that was what I was planning on. And I'm sitting there. It was Palm Springs. It was 120 degrees. We were in Rancho Mirage at a Borders when they still existed, and not a single human being came in the store, or even drove by it, or walked by it, or even moved outside. Because, well, it was Palm Springs. It was 120 degrees. People go underground until the sun sets. So the staff felt sorry for me and all that, but we didn't care. But I saw a rack of Dummies books over there, and I said, I wonder if they have Forensics for Dummies. So I went over and looked, didn't find it, came home that night. It was a Saturday, went online, went to Wiley. They didn't have it. And I said, So I called Kimberly and I said, what do you think? She said, I think it's a great idea. You should write that book. I said, well, that's what I was thinking. And so BEA was the next week in LA. To make a long story short, I went to BEA. I went to the Wiley booth. I found the woman in charge of Diane, who was great, is in charge of the Dummies series. And I went up to her and I handed her my card for Murder and Mayhem and introduced myself. And she looked at it and she said, you wrote this book? And I said, yeah. She said, I love this book. I've read it. It's fantastic. I said, well, thank you. And she said, in fact, we're thinking about doing a book called Forensics for Dummies. I said, that's what I wanted to talk to you about. That's my idea. That's what I want to do. She said, we don't have an author attached to it yet. I said, well, you do now. And that's how it started.
Hey, Steve. Steve,
Yeah.
Before we move on, we have a few of our folks who have some really good questions about how forensics works, including what are some of the common mistakes that you see when you're watching, either reading in books or watching television, that people make when they're doing forensics, besides the fact that they're all unmasked, ungloved, and wandering around a dead body.
Yeah, I watch it all the time, and people break into houses and aren't wearing gloves and touch everything. It drives me up the wall. Like, a cop's best friend is the fact that criminals are stupid. So there is that. I think there's several things, and one is people don't know what a heart attack is, and so they say you had a heart attack or a heart seizure. That's a great word. There's no such thing as that. A heart attack is when a coronary artery plugs, blood flow stops to a certain area of the heart, and the heart dies in that area. That's a myocardial infarction, or MI, or heart attack. And there are no drugs that will make that happen. I get asked that question once a month. I need a drug to make a heart attack. No, there's no such thing. Now, there are those that might make, and not predictably anyway, there are those things that might make it look like it. Now, a sudden death is usually from a change in cardiac rhythm. So amphetamines and cocaine and all this kind of stuff can cause that, but again, not predictably. Killers like predictable things. So not understanding a heart attack is number one. And probably second is they want a drug that they can put in the person's breakfast, and at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, they drop dead. Well, drugs don't have timers, and you can't do that. And drugs that kill quickly act quickly. Drugs that kill slowly act slowly. Arsenic may take several days to kill you, but cyanide will kill you in a New York minute. And so you can't just now, you can rig it where they don't interface with the drug till later, but that's storytelling. That's what you do to tell your story. How do you make them delay taking it? And all those things. So I get a lot of questions about drugs that they want them to do something or happen at a certain time. And the next is the one punch knockout. You can't knock somebody out with one punch unless you're Mike Tyson. And of course he can do that on an airplane apparently. It just doesn't happen. And if they are knocked out, they're out for a few seconds or a few minutes, because if they're out for an hour, something really bad's going on. So don't have your person knocked out, put in the trunk of the car, driven 100 miles away. They open the trunk and splash water on the face and wake him up. Now he's going to wake up in about 2 minutes and start kicking the trunk of the car. Let me out of here. So things like that. But as long as it's a good story, I'll go with it.
So what is the most bizarre question you've ever been asked
Oh, there's so
about
many.
forensic?
There's so many, but I remember one that made it in my first book. This girl who was 16-year-old girl babysat for the woman next door, and she found out the woman next door was having an affair with her father. This is the story that was that was asked me, and she wanted to do something to create problems for that woman, and so she wanted to do something with the condoms. And I said, okay, you know, I'm from the South. I can tell you the answer for everything in life: Tabasco. So I said, smear some Tabasco on the condoms and put them back in the package. And then when he, you know, it'll dry. And then when he puts one on and things get to going, guess what? Both of them are going to go insane because Tabasco does not play well with tender tissues. Let's just leave it at that. So that was one of the funniest and most bizarre questions I ever got asked. And that made it in Murder and Mayhem.
We do have a few, we
Yeah.
do have a
Sure.
few more forensic questions, if
Okay.
it's all right, Steve, to
Yeah,
follow
go
up.
forward with them.
Yeah, besides the comic, what happens, or how would you spot, how would you identify a suspicious death for a person who's kind of in a hospital setting? And there's another similar question that has to do with hospice as well. How would you identify a suspicious death for a person who's already in hospice? We do see some of, you know, you see those often enough in some of the TV shows.
Hospitals, nursing homes, things like that are more dangerous than freeways on New Year's Eve. It's you know, there's a lot of things that'll kill you in there, and there's a lot of people who know how to do it, and there's some psychopaths and sociopaths, as you well know. The everybody from Swango, the serial killer, physician, and you know, the angel of death nurses and respiratory techs. You read these stories all the time, and you're thinking, how the hell did they get away with this, killing 30 people, you know, over a 2-year period? Well, it's because, guess what? People die in the hospital. And if they're elderly people who are old and infirm and have heart and lung disease and diabetes and all the other stuff that goes along with aging, how do you know it wasn't a natural death? And so consequently, you know, I've signed death certificates in my career, many of them, and in cardiology, people sometimes don't make it. And you have to, and you basically put in there the immediate cause of death, the other cause, the underlying cause of death, and ancillary things, and then you put in. But my signing of a death certificate is not really official. That has to be rubber stamped by the county coroner. Now it's done automatically 99.99% of the time because he doesn't have the time or the interest to deal with it. So could someone sign a fake death certificate? You betcha. Happens. It happens. And so consequently, if someone dies in a hospital, there better be something really suspicious going on or something really odd. But if you just go in and, you know, shoot too much digitalis in them, and if you go in and put too much potassium chloride in them and they die, an autopsy might not even be done. Now, hospital deaths are one of the ones that coroner's discretion. He can do that anytime he wants, or he can say no. You know, this is straightforward. I see this. Remember, they got a budget, they got a backlog, they got all this stuff to consider too. It's not like, you know, this is the only case that they're dealing with. So they may just say, you know, this sure, you know, this guy was 82 years old, you know. Well, then sometimes the insurance company comes along. Yeah, but there's a $10 million inheritance here. You know, we don't want to pay it out, but, you know, because we don't have to pay it out if somebody is murdered. So we're going to look into it. So there's a million reasons to get into that arena and then have an autopsy done, and that might change everything or not. But a lot of deaths just happen in facilities. And when these angels of death get caught, it's when a pattern emerges. But it's the same way with serial killers out in the real world. 1 murder, 2 murders, 3 murders. Well, wait a minute. Something's going on here. There's too many signature consistencies in these murders. Maybe there's a connection. So that it's happening the same way in hospitals.
I see a question someone asked, Corey Miller. what experience do you have with virtual autopsies? Now, that's a term I'm not really used to. So are you familiar with that term?
I really don't have any experience because I don't work in forensic science. You know, the medical examiners would know that stuff. What they do is they're basically doing CT scans and MRIs and all that stuff and looking at the pictures, and they're pretty clear. But I don't know if it's the same as having your hands in there, but and visualizing everything. But that's kind of how they do a lot of it.
Did you ever think, given your interest, did you ever think about, and I know that it's like making a major change, but did you ever think about moving into forensics in your medical practice?
No. No, I don't like dead bodies. It's not as glamorous as it looks. I mean, it's really kind of a drudgery work. It's interesting in some cases and stuff. I tell you what, I wouldn't mind being in the room and working with homicide detectives and just helping them sort through the evidence and the forensic science. I think that's puzzle, that's problem solving, and that's pretty much what we do as physicians. And I like puzzles and problem solving. I like that. But
have you ever done that? Have you ever worked
No.
with any police departments or had a forensics version of a ride along?
I actually spent an afternoon with the Vice Squad detectives up here in Orange County at the Orange County Sheriff's Department, and we spent about 4 or 5 hours telling stories. And I want to tell you, man, it was crazy, and I used a few things I learned there in stories along the way. But it was, you know, all the vice crimes you can think of, and they had stories.
Jana, you got a couple more questions, right?
Yeah, we do. We have a couple more. One of our early questions came from somebody who's really curious about fingerprints.
Yeah.
And how long do they last in, you know, different weather conditions and circumstances?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I mean, on the body, they can last forever until it's decomposed. You know, they've taken fingerprints from mummies. So if it doesn't decay, the ridge detail is still there. Well, how good a fingerprint is depends upon how dirty the person's hands are, of course, because that's where it comes from, is oil and grime and cellular material. And if you've just washed your hands, you're going to leave a fainter fingerprint than, you know, if you've you know, been walking around for a few hours. And then the surface that it's placed on, you know, glass or ceramic tile or something that's smooth and hard, polished desktop, something like that. It'll stick to that much clearer than it will, obviously, to a curtain or a rough surface. That just makes sense. And then if it is protected from the elements, like a lot of rain and snow and wind and stuff like that, I mean, it could last 100 years. I mean, why wouldn't it? If someone does it down in a basement on a piece of glass, what would alter it? It's not going to go away. It's going to kind of harden there and be there. So it can last a long time if it's protected from the environment. If it's out in the environment, who knows? If it rains hard, it could be, you know, destroyed in minutes. If it drizzles for days, it could take days. But fingerprints are pretty resilient if they're in the right place.
Okay.
How about DNA in a situation like that?
Well, again, they've extracted DNA from mummies that are thousands of years old. It depends upon, again, the state of decay of the body as to where they can get it. But even in bones, and particularly teeth, because the enamel protects stuff inside, and it seems to dry out rather than decay in a lot of cases. And you can drill into the teeth and drill into the bones and sometimes get some cellular material, even though it's no longer completely intact. You can get DNA that's usable out of those situations, and that's been done. You know, that's been done. Of course, you can get DNA from a fingerprint too. So
go ahead, Janet.
Yeah, a couple more questions. Have you ever seen a death by plant that is accidental and not suspicious? Like eating the wrong mushrooms, but with
sure.
other kinds of plants? And any
sure.
examples?
Sure, that happens all the time, especially with mushrooms. You know, people want to you know, get close to earth, and we're going to go out and forage, you know, and live like our ancestors did 200 years ago. Well, you better know which mushrooms you're stewing up, because if you stew up the wrong ones, the death cap mushrooms, they will kill you dead. Now, the psilocybin ones, which are the magic mushrooms, can also kill you if you eat enough of them. I mean, it's a toxic chemical that just kind of makes you goofy for a while and follow the Grateful Dead around. But if you eat the wrong kind, the death cap type, the toxins in there, and the dangerous part about them is they don't work their mischief for about 48 hours. And then your liver starts going to hell. And so you don't know. And by the time you start having symptoms of pain and turning yellow and all these other things that go along with your liver going down the tubes, it's too late, because it's all been absorbed. It's gone through your GI tract. They can't make you vomit. They can't, you know, lavage your stomach. They can't give you things to push it on through, you know, mag citrate and all those things to clean your bowels out. You know, you've all had a colonoscopy, that kind of stuff, the prep for that. They can't do that because it's all over with. It's all done. It's passed through and all the toxins already been absorbed. And then it becomes problematic. So yeah, people do it all the time. People also eat oleander, and rhubarb can kill you. And I mean, there's a lot of stuff out there that can kill you. And, you know, foxglove, that's where digitalis comes from. And if you try to stew up some foxglove plant, you can kill yourself. So I always said the most dangerous place, if you want to kill somebody, don't go to the pharmacy, go to the plant store. I mean, there's some bad stuff out there.
So what's this about rhubarb? Because I like rhubarb.
Yeah, well, you have to cook it. You know, if you raw rhubarb, certain parts of the plant can be very toxic, and also they can, you know, burn your esophagus and your stomach. You know, you probably wouldn't eat much of it, but the point is that it can be toxic. That's why you cook it.
More questions, Janet?
Yeah. Here's another one. How long after death can drugs be detected in a corpse? The question is in general, but Gail, who's asking the question, is really wondering about the fentanyl family, and she mentioned carfentanil.
Yeah.
Would it still be detectable months after death?
It could. It depends upon the state of. Remember, for a drug to have effect, it's got to be in the bloodstream. It can't get to the body. It can't get to where it's going if it doesn't get in the bloodstream. So that means it's absorbed. You've either breathed it, you've swallowed it, it's come through your skin, or it's been injected. Those are the routes that most things enter the human body. All right. So but from there, it's got to get, it's fentanyl sitting in your stomach isn't going to hurt you. But it gets rapidly absorbed into the bloodstream, and that's what's going to kill you. So if the body is intact, let's say the person is just, you know, dropped in a freezer somewhere. They always seem to think that does something. And all it does is preserve the evidence. And they've died of fentanyl, and, you know, the guy sticks them in a freezer because he's going to take them away and bury them and never gets around to it. And then they find the body a month later. Well, guess what? They're going to test the tissues, and all that fentanyl's in there. Now, if the body decays completely away, then it's less likely you're going to be able to find fentanyl. Now, there are certain things that you can find, and I'm not sure fentanyl, that actually played out in the hair, and you can find it in the hair. And so the hair, the corpse's hair will often be intact months and years after the body has been skeletonized, and the hair is still there. So you can find arsenic and other heavy metals in hair a lot of times. GHB can be found in hair. So they would look at all that stuff. They would look at whatever they can look at to find it. But if the body's not completely decayed, there's a good chance you'll be able to find the drug. It may cost money, it may take time, but it can be done.
It's an interesting pairing with our program last month, which is on the chapter's YouTube channel, which was Mary Roach, who wrote the book Stiff, The Curious Life of Cadavers. So
yep,
it works well with what she was saying last month. More questions, Janet.
Well, here's one. Somebody asked, in Forensics for Dummies, Frances Glessner Lee's work wasn't mentioned. What experience have you had regarding her nutshell studies of unexplained death? Have you seen them?
No, I have not.
Some folks
Remember,
are,
this was written almost 20 years ago now.
your book.
Yeah,
And-
Forensics for Dummies. The first issue was 2005, and then I revised it in 2015.
Well, I've just got to say, I've got your second edition on my desk, and it's extremely helpful.
Good.
I
Thank you.
appreciate it.
You remember those guys that robbed the bank in London that tunneled in? You know, they took the place next door and spent all weekend tunneling into the bank and the vault and all that and stealing all that money. It was a famous case. I actually got an email from one of the detectives involved there and said when they found the guys and arrested them, they had a copy of Forensics for Dummies on their desk.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
I emailed him back and I said they probably had volume 1. They should have read the revised version. I've had that 2 or 3 times, you know,
So
and I've gotten letters from prisoners with graphic details of how they were framed and they didn't really do it. And they wanted me to help them prove that they didn't do it and that it was self-defense and they just had to hit the person 30 times with a hammer, you know. And the one girl in a prison in Texas actually drew diagrams of the crime scene. I mean, it's 30 pages long, handwritten. I never responded, of course, but
that's what I was going to ask. How do you respond to those? You just put them in.
no, you don't. They sent them to my office, thank God. If they sent them to my home, I'd call the FBI.
Hey, I think you have an old friend of yours. Who
Yeah,
called.
Tom, I see that.
Yeah.
Hey,
So-
Tom,
So anyhow,
I see
go
him
ahead.
smiling.
More-
I see his smiling face.
So I did note, by the way, you wrote the ABA. Did they approach you, or you approached them for the forensic science book?
Well, actually, I was at BEA in New York and I was signing a book. I forget which one, but you know, they have long lines of people and you're signing books for the publisher, and I'm there. And as it got down to that's the last dozen people or so, and I see a guy hanging around kind of at the back. He's not really in line, but he's not really out of line, you know. And so finally, I signed the last book and everything, and he steps up and he says, he introduced himself and he said, "I'm from the American Bar Association." And we're looking if you want to know if you'd be interested in writing a book on forensic science for attorneys. And I said, sure. I said, you know, as long as you understand, I said, I know nothing about the law, you know, and furthermore, I don't want to know anything about it. I don't have the time to educate myself. I said, I only know the science. He said, no, that's what we want. We just want to know, we want a book about the science and how the science works, you know, for attorneys. And he said, you know, we saw Forensics for Dummies. And so kind of something along that line. And I said, oh, I get it. So you want me to take Forensics for Dummies and dumb it down for lawyers? And he laughed and he said, yeah, that's exactly what we want. I said, okay, I can do that.
Somehow I knew there was a good story in that.
Yeah.
Somebody just asked the question, and if you have a question, get them on now because we're running down to the last 10 minutes here. But how does Haldol affect the liver if a person has liver disease?
Yeah, Haldol is a sedative drug. It can be antipsychotic. You know, you can get a sedative. You can classify it in a lot of categories. But Haldol is one of the mainstays of treatment for DTs. And we used it a lot in medical school. We'd get people in with DTs and you'd have to sedate them for the 2 or 3 days while the alcohol wore off. Otherwise, they were screaming and yelling and climbing the walls and going crazy. And Haldol worked very well for that because, you know, you could give it by a lot of different routes. But the main thing about Haldol is that it wasn't too awfully bad on the liver as long as you know, had a controlled dose, because it was excreted through the lungs. So, you know, you could actually smell it, you know, on the person. They would be excreting the Haldol product. So Haldol actually, because alcoholics, a lot of them had liver damage and cirrhosis and all that stuff, it was a preferred drug for that. So because it was relatively non-toxic for the liver. But anything can kill the liver if you take enough of it.
Somebody did have a
You have
question.
written,
Wait, Steve, somebody had a question very early on when we were still on writing. Just really wanted to talk about some of the writing tools that you use.
Yeah.
What software do you use any of the software like Plotter, Scrivener, or anything?
Scrivener.
Scrivener.
I've been using it for 20 years. And
Can you talk a little more about how it works for you?
for me, I probably only use, 20% of what it does because I don't use all the compile and all that stuff. But if you're interested in making your writing easier, the part I use is that if you go to Scrivener and you have the screen, there's the area where you work. There's an area where you can put a little outline over to the right where you have the title of that scene and you can write little notes about it. And then over here, you add scenes. And I don't want to get too deep in the woods on that, but basically what you're working with is you have a whole list of all your scenes down one side. And any one you click on is the one that's going to appear here. And if you and then I color code those because I write multiple points of view. So Jake is always red, Nicole's always yellow, Pancake's always green, Ray's always blue. And so my four main characters. So I know who is the point of view character for each scene. But that's just tagging with a color. So let's say I'm on scene 30 and Jake's talking to somebody, but I know he talked to them earlier, somewhere back in the story. Well, I want to know what they talked about then, so I'm not redundant and it flows well. Well, I just look over to the left and I say, oh, here it says Jake talks to so, and click on it. Bang, there it is. So you can move back and forth and move around this thing without scrolling any. And that's the beauty. To me, it's the organization. And I'm big on organization. So, and I will also tell you one other little trick, and I think this is critically important because I do not trust any software whatsoever to survive. I think it will die in the middle of and at the worst time. I've lost stuff before. At the end of every session, you see you have manuscript and you have your whole list of all your scenes. And each scene, there's a word count down at the bottom, so you know what you're doing. You go up and click manuscript, and it shows the whole manuscript. And at the bottom, it'll say 52,382 words, wherever you are in the story. I copy and paste that into my word processing, which I use Pages because I'm a Mac guy, and I date that. So every time I complete a writing session, I overwrite what I'd saved before. So now I've got it not only in the cloud, because I'm big in the cloud with Dropbox, but I have it in 2 different programs. And if one dies, the other's still there. But Scrivener itself, if you haven't used it, download the free trial and play with it a little bit, and you will be amazed how simple it is. And keep it simple. You just want to organize your scenes and have a workspace to work with. That's really all you have to do. Now there's a cork board and there's an outline and there's all these other things you see in other things. I don't ever really use those. I just have my list of scenes on the left and what I'm working on open in the middle. And I think it saves so much time, so much time.
One of the great things about Scrivener, I use it, but it's really easy to move scenes. You don't have to copy and paste and move.
No, you just drag it.
And you just drag it. And if you don't like it, you drag it someplace else.
Yeah, you put it down in the trash or put it in another folder to hold it, and maybe you'll use it later, maybe not.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question. Because you've written fiction, because you've written nonfiction, what gives you more satisfaction? Which type of writing? Which is more difficult for you? Which is more fun?
I think fiction. I think it's more fun. I think it's more freeing. I think it's playtime. I haven't written a nonfiction book in a while because, I mean, it is work. You got to do all the research and stuff. Fiction, you just play. You sit in your pajamas at 5:30 in the morning and play with your imaginary friends and kill people. I mean, good Lord, how much fun is that? But I like both. And people say, well, what's the difference? And I say they're exactly the same. Well, except different. And in nonfiction, you do all the research, you get everything in a row, and you do outline nonfiction. You must do that because you must have organization to what you're talking about. And so you get all the research done, and then you just write it. And you try to use some of your writing skills to make it readable and fun and all that, and not, you know, too dry like a textbook. But so the research comes first. With fiction, I do just what research I have to do to kind of get the story started, and then I will look up what I need along the way, you know, and research along the way. I mean, just this morning, I was working on the next Kane Harper book. I got 2 books in the pipeline now, so this will be 3 books down the road. I had a scene that I was going to set in Biloxi at a casino down there, and then the logistics became between Nashville and there just became too much. So I looked at Tunica, which is in northern Mississippi on the Mississippi River, and it's close to the crossroads. It's close to Memphis. It's got so much rich culture and history there. And I said, duh. You know, so now I'm going to move those scenes. I've already written a couple of scenes, but I'm going to remove those scenes just to Tunica. Well, that'll take 10 minutes, you know, because the bulk of the scene, 90% of the scene is going to stay the same. It's just the location. I got to change a few things, but things like that. You do research. I mean, I was writing a book once, and I had a Dub Walker stop in Rome, Georgia. They were heading to Carolinas for something, and the Asheville area, and they went into a Starbucks. And then as I'm going through the second rewrite, I said, surely there's a Starbucks in Rome, Georgia. I mean, there's a Starbucks on the moon. There's Starbucks everywhere. So I went there, and sure enough, there were 3 of them. Now, I didn't put it in the same location, but it didn't matter. I just wanted to make sure there was a Starbucks there, you know, and little things like that. And they can, you know, somebody in Rome, Georgia say, we don't allow Starbucks in here, you know, we only allow Pete's. You never know.
So one last question, at least for me, which is, if there's one piece of advice you can offer to writers, whether they're published or want to be published, they're working on their first novel or their 10th. So what's the best piece of advice you either received or that you can offer to writers?
Well, I think we touched on it earlier, and that means tell your story your way, find your voice. When a publisher or agent is saying, I'm looking for something fresh, I'm looking for something new, I'm looking for something that speaks to me, what they're saying is, I'm looking for a voice. I'm looking for a writer who I want to listen to them tell a story. It's not even so much what the story's about. It's, is this person a good storyteller? And do I like the way they're telling a story? And that's your voice, your way. Remember, as I said, every story's been written, but it hadn't been written by you. So write your story. If you want to learn a lot about not only how to start a novel, and I used to do this, and also about voice. I used to go over to our Borders over here, and Nan and I'd go over there on Saturday or Sunday morning, and would get some coffee and sit in their little cafe. And I'd go through the stacks, and I would pick about a dozen books off and come back to the table. And I would read the first couple of pages of each one. And then I'd take those back, and I'd get a dozen more. And I'd probably read 40 books, the first couple of pages, just doing an hour, hour and a half while you're having coffee and whatever. And what you see is that every voice is different. Some of it will resonate with you, some of it won't. And you will incorporate, I won't say copy because that's the wrong thing, because that their voice is not your voice, but you will incorporate that. And I think more so it will show you that there's a million ways to spin a yarn. And so spin it your way. And I think it'll give you, we come back to that confidence thing and saying, you know, that this breaks a rule, that breaks a rule. Look at that. There's passive voice. What is this? Yeah. Who cares? But I enjoyed it. I like listening to this person. I like reading this person. And that is the key. And when they say that you have to grab your agent or editor in the first page, they're not talking about the story. And they're not talking about a dead body. And they're not talking about an explosion or a car chase. What they're talking about is the voice of the writer. And if that grabs them, they will go to page 2 and 3 and 4 and so on. It's the voice. Tell your story your way and don't be afraid to do it.
Excellent. Listen, I cannot thank you enough for taking your time and joining us. It's been a great program. If anybody wants to review this, listen to it again, it is on YouTube under the Speed City Sisters in Crime YouTube channel. And Doug, it's just been outstanding.
It's my pleasure. I really enjoyed it. Great questions, good audience. Sorry, Tom had to come, but you know, what the heck. But
I'm harmless.
Exactly. But I enjoyed it, and I'll come back anytime you want to. And send me a link for the YouTube thing when it's up so I can go spread the word.
We will do that. We'll do that.
All right.
Thank you.
Hey, wait, before we sign off, just a really quick plug. Really want to say thanks to everybody who came from outside Speed City Sisters in Crime. This was a wonderful program. Anybody who's interested in joining the Speed City chapter of Sisters in Crime, just connect with us through our website, which just try Speed City, you'll find it. And if you're in other locations, Sisters in Crime is everywhere. So you can probably find a local chapter to connect with, because chapters all across the country have really good programs like this. But this was one of the best programs we've had. I'm just thinking now that there should be I can see a TV series in your future where a world-renowned heart surgeon who happens to write mysteries on the side ends up helping the police. But he starts out helping the police because he's a suspect in a suspicious death that happened on his operating table.
That's an episode of Diagnosis Murder.
Oh, no, better. You're much more interesting.
So is there, I know we're sort of concluded, but on the other hand, there was one question, if I can ask, I'll go back up here. Somebody asked, what are the ways to kill that are most likely to remain undetected? We assume, since it's from Tom, that this is for writing purposes only.
Well, the number one, the one easiest thing is to, if someone's taking medications, kill them with their own medication. Figure out if they're taking digitalis, figure out a way to give them 10 of them. And then it's not anything foreign. And they just think they got their medicines mixed up and, they took too much and got toxic and got sick and died. Trust me, it happens all the time. Medication errors and medication mix-up are a leading cause of death. So, that's when we talked about it a little bit earlier with hospitals and nursing homes, and medication errors there lead to a lot of deaths. So, make it look like what it's not. Problem is that most killers kill and then try to cover it. By then it's too late. You've already dropped all the clues, man. And whatever you do, don't take an insurance policy for $1 million out a week before you kill them. I mean, good Lord.
So one other question I had for you, which is the TVs and movies, any interest in Jake or any of your other characters
sure.
ending up on the big screen, little screen?
I'm here. Just call me. I'm here. Just call me. I'll be happy to see both on the screen. But that's a huge leap.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you.
It's been great. I echo Janet. This is one of the best programs we've had. So thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you, Doug. Thank you, Indiana from
yes.
Minnesota, and a Sisters in Crime member here in Minneapolis.
Okay. Home of BoucherCon coming up in September.
Yeah, excellent. I was wondering if you're coming, Doug.
No, I'm not. Yeah, no, it's football season. I don't travel during college football season.
I was going to offer you a refreshment.
Well, I appreciate it. Another place, another time.
I hope so.
Yeah. No, I'm in front of the TV watching Alabama.
Well, Tom, we have a whole contingent coming from Indianapolis, so maybe we'll see you there.
Oh, great. Yeah, fantastic. Hope
You may
it's gonna
regret
be
it,
fun.
but
Yeah.
you may
Yeah.
regret it.
Thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you all.
Thanks.
Great.
Thanks, everybody
Thank
who's been
you.
part of this.
All righty. Bye-bye.